Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Toya Murray. I am a film critic, writer, and all-around film nerd, a little bit of a historian, talker extraordinaire, kind of my jam. And I wanted to make a video about something that is very exciting and important to me. I just read Toni Morrison's Beloved for the first time. Now, little did I know when reading this book, 32 years too late to the game, but better late than never. Little did I know that I would be finishing this book and putting this video out around three pretty seminal important dates. So I finished this earlier last month, which just so happened to mark the year anniversary of Toni Morrison's death. Acclaimed author, writer, editor, novelist, all around amazing badass black woman navigating America as best as she could, passed away August 5th in 2019. And that is around the time that I first got interested in reading Beloved. Now, Beloved's kind of been in and out of my life for a long time, and I'll get to that of why. But I just never read it. I'm a late bloomer to Toni Morrison's work. I didn't really read her until I was well into my mid-20s. And so when she passed, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, The Nod, and this writer, Caitlin Grinridge, was on there, and she spoke about Beloved and just how sublime and fascinating this book is, of being a horror story written by a black woman. And that's something I don't ever hear about, and I'm a huge horror fan, and as a black woman that loves horror, it's very, very hard to see ourselves reflected positively in these films, or even at all in these worlds as characters with agency. So I finally decided to read it. Beloved, the book, was released September 1988, which marks this month being its 32nd year anniversary, which, oddly enough, I'm 32 years old. And after rewatching the movie, I found out the movie was released October of 1998. So it's just an interesting little string of events that happened there. But my introduction to Toni Morrison was actually a little known show on Disney Channel called Smart Guy. Smart Guy, yeah. There's multiple jokes that are made in this episode about Beloved.
We gotta get out of here. Someplace nobody thinks to go.
Well, Beloved's playing at the Dollar Movie.
Perfect, let's go!
So because I've always loved moments of art, commenting on art, as a kid, because of this scene in Smart Guy, I ended up watching Beloved for the first time. Was completely unimpressed, didn't enjoy it, but watched enough to recognize that I could say, yeah, no, I saw Beloved, the 3-hour epic starring Danny Glover and Oprah Winfrey as a 12-year-old.
This is stupid. I am not gonna spy on my girlfriend. And I sure don't want to see Danny Glover's naked butt. Oprah looked pretty good, though.
I would eventually find my way back to Toni's work. And it's for me, having her in my life has been when I discovered the Beatles, that how did I live my life without this knowledge, without this wisdom, without this love, without this education? How did I do this? And I'm just grateful to now be in a world where I know what it's like with it, and I'm never going back. So I ended up reading the book, and Beloved is incredible. It's a phenomenal story. It's haunting, it's beautiful, it's sad, it's exciting, it's thrilling, it's everything. It's legitimately all emotions wrapped into one in a beautifully breathtaking story. Toni Morrison did American literature a huge favor by giving us this book, just as she did with Sulla, just as she did with The Bluest Eye. I mean, the fact that this woman isn't considered one of the greatest American novelists is truly a crime, to just show that racism and sexism will always affect the way we see things. Maybe, things are starting to change now for the better, which is great, but the fact that this woman isn't on the same level when talking about great American novelists as some of these more eye-rolling, writers that we're just forced to read in school, and that's probably the only reason that we like them, because, well, yeah, I read Great Gatsby when I was in school. No slight against Great Gatsby. The greatest thing that I love about Beloved is that this story isn't just a means to an end in understanding Blackness. It's an exploration of the human psyche, and it definitely is an exploration of the psyche of a tormented group of people, and what happens when You enslave people, you oppress, you abuse, and what they have to do to make themselves come out of this, how they have to be resilient, and what that sense of strength and resiliency does to their spirit, to their soul, and the actions that they take, and the effects that it has on the people that love them. Even the ability to love other people because of what they've gone through. And that's something that Toni dives deep into, she plays around with, she shows you, she gets you in the head of these characters. And there's just an array of emotions that come with that. It's sad, it's uplifting, it's inspiring, it's depressing, it's fucking pissed me off so many times. Toni's writing is simply fantastic throughout Beloved. Her prose reads like poetry. She has a beautiful command of the English language. The way that everything ties together, the way that it flows off the page, the way that it brings you back in. She's very detail oriented, and it's beautiful the way that this book is constructed. Her book shows the spectrum of the evil of slavery, the things that we all know: children being sold, women being abused, men being abused, people being humans, just being beaten, being, locked up, being put in situations where cruel and unusual punishment is used against them. So much of that is evident in this book, and so much so is used with the kind of boogeyman figure who is school teacher, which, even saying his name kind of makes me go, ugh, because of Setha's reaction to school teacher. Setha has such a visceral, painful reaction to this man. He's this very evil, studious man who studies these people as if they're animals. And there's this fantastic recurring theme that they kind of keep going back to. It's not even a theme, it's a memory that Setha has, where school teacher, she overhears him talking about her, and she hears the term animal characteristics, and she goes to her now sick, bedridden owner and asks her, what does characteristics mean? And her owner explains it to her, and it's still this kind of foreign concept, but Setha still recognizes he's saying something about me that's not me, that's not true. Like, I'm not an animal. Well, I don't know what characteristics mean, but I'm not an animal. And this is how this man views them. And so therefore, through that lens, this is, there's a whole world of pain and trauma that happens in their life that pushes Setha, Paul D, and the group of slaves that live on the plantation to run. Morrison doesn't just keep you hanging to the beats of this story. She engulfs you in it. She pulls you in it. She makes you feel the suffocating pain that these characters are enduring, that they're going through, and she makes you realize the reality of what this situation of slavery was. It doesn't feel like this far off concept. It is a very real and pointed to situation in which the pain that is endured, the pain that comes from it, is almost palpable. And I think that Toni does a fantastic job of bringing that to life, because I think that it's so easy to think of things in the past as if they're forgotten and, well, we're not that anymore, so why should I, that's the current struggle that we're in right now. And I think that, I'll get into why that is such a, there's plenty of books and movies and people talking on YouTube probably about why that is such a distorted viewpoint of the world. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but first let's talk about the movie and how the movie completely fumbles all of the power that the book has. Now, made in 1998, Beloved the movie stars Oprah Winfrey, Danny Glover, Thandie Newton, Kimberly Elise. It is the who's who of black actors at the time. It's great. It's fantastic. The cast is wonderful. Jonathan Demme, who, did Manchurian Candidate, he did Philadelphia, Silence of the Lamb fame. This guy has won an Oscar by this point. I should probably check if he actually won an Oscar. Okay, he did. He definitely did. So this is an Oscar-winning director who helms this movie, and everyone tries their absolute best, and it is evident on the screen, it's evident in the script, it's evident in the performances. Everyone attempts to bring their best to this film. Unfortunately, their best just isn't good enough. Beloved it's a faithful adaptation of the book, so much so that some lines they're almost verbatim from the book, but that doesn't mean that the emotion is present. That doesn't mean that the subtext is there. And that's a big thing that this movie lacks, is understanding the subtext and the symbolism that was present in the book. And one of the more disappointing elements is the cinematography, in my opinion. Now, I watched a video on here where another reviewer years ago talked about this, and one of the highlights he said of this movie was the cinematography, which made me kind of go, does my TV suck? And the answer, no, my TV is fine. But I think the issue here is the cinematographer for this film, Tak Fujimoto, does as best as he knows how with the world that he's in, but I still don't think that he truly understands the world that he's in. Especially when you think that, over 10 years before Beloved is made, Steven Spielberg did The Color Purple, which has some of the greatest cinematography I've seen for Black characters, probably up until Moonlight, of just the way characters are captured, the way that the melanin just glows on screen, the way that colors around the skin and within the scene pop, and there is no pop in Beloved. That's the unfortunate part. Everything's very dull, it's very muted, it's of the time, but I think that, again, speaking to The Color Purple, set arguably around the same time. Granted, Color Purple is a little bit later, but you still have these dusty type of landscapes, rural areas where there's lots of wood, lots of trees, lots of forest, but there's also flowers. There's also print on the clothing. There's also color that exists here that Tak Fujimoto doesn't really play well with, which is very disappointing considering just how powerful color is in the book. Toni Morrison makes a big decision to call out lots of colors, of characters even fixate on certain colors. They become obsessed with, maybe it's 2 squares of color, and just, seeing color for what feels like the first time when they're in situations that are life affirming to them, or recognizing these important moments in their life based on color that is around them, and all of that is completely missing from the film. That's really disappointing. And also just the screenplay, it tries, and I respect it for trying. It's just, again, the subtext is not there. A perfect example of that is a scene between Paul D and Setha when Paul D first comes to visit the home, and these two, already we know that there is an unrequited love situation there, but Paul D also loves this person as a sister, but then there's a little bit something more there, and they haven't seen each other in 18 years since the night that they both decided to run. And it was a run gone wrong. Lots of things happened. They got separated. So these two have not seen each other since. And Setha, while they're catching up, she's cooking and she's talking about the cherry choke tree that's on her back, which we find out is a bunch of scars that kind of resemble a tree. They may or may not resemble a tree, but these are the scars that are on her back, and these scars are the results of the beating that she took that made her decide, like, fuck this, I'm leaving. So while she's talking, Paul D is just kind of overcome with emotion of listening to this woman that he has loved so deeply talk about this painful time in her life. So he walks up to her, he undresses her, and he begins to kiss her back, and then he cradles her breast. And in the book, it's beautiful the way this scene kind of comes together. It's very intimate, it's very emotional. And in the movie, it's just there, it's just presented, it's kind of weird and a little odd, and I don't think that Oprah and Danny Glover's, chemistry was necessarily there. So yeah, there's just a lot of these little moments where, of course, in the book it works a little bit better than in the movie, and I think that the biggest reason for that is because the movie doesn't necessarily seem to trust that the audience is along for this world that Toni has presented. It seems to be giving people no, they're not going to want that. Let's just give them the slave narrative with a little bit of ghost stuff. And that's really a discredit to the work, because to call Beloved a horror story or like a ghost story feels very shallow and kind of hollow to what this story actually is. What Toni does is present us a historical narrative, a historical fiction that is set in a very real world with very real consequences around people that, who knows, may or may not exist. I mean, she actually got the idea for creating Setha from an article, an old archived piece that she found in a very old newspaper from the 1800s about a slave who killed her daughter. And so she thought, well, what would bring someone to do that? And so therefore she wrote this story to kind of give that reasoning and to give that closure to this woman, this real life closure that she probably could not get. The movie's not all bad. For it to be a 3-hour movie, the pacing is actually pretty good, and I didn't feel a moment of boredom. The story does continue. It moves very quickly. There's just, of course, after reading the book, there's so much that you want to be present there that's just not present. So the ending of Beloved, both the book and the movie, leaves it up to interpretation as to, is Beloved a ghost? Is she, was she a real person? Was she the woman who escaped from the plantation, a couple miles down, who found her way there? Regardless, the answer is irrelevant, even though my take is that Beloved is a manifestation of the trauma that Setha has been carrying with her. I think that trauma is added with Denver's own trauma that has been passed down to her. And I think that both of these two women living alone for so long, seeing the loss around them of, their Setha's mother-in-law passing, Setha's other two children running away at a very young age. I think that all of this led to this manifestation of this ghostly apparition. And I think that the arrival of Paul D and the trauma and pain that he brought along with him basically materialized this thing into a real form. I'm all about that. I totally think that that's the story that's in my head. But regardless, it's irrelevant. And that's kind of cool because you get this interesting narrative that plays within the sandbox of being a ghost story, and you don't necessarily lean on the horror in the way that you would expect with a ghost story. The horror here is the world in which these people survive in. Now, oddly enough, after finishing this book, another little kismet moment that I really enjoyed, literally, I think it was the night of or the night after, I was like, okay, I'm done. The book was heavy. I'm going to turn off my brain. I'm going to watch John Oliver. Why? Because why did I think that was, a not heavy thing to do? But interestingly enough, John Oliver had an episode where he was talking about the history of America and how wrong we all as a collective society get it, that we're on different levels of understanding our own history. And there's a reason for that, because the suppression of information is real. It has been real since slavery, since before slavery, but that's how this country rolls, man. We love our lies. We love our lies more than we love our truths. And instead of addressing the atrocities that we've done to ourselves as Americans and as humans in the past, we just ignore it. We just go, you know what? That was in the past. That was when we didn't know better, but now we know better. Can we just move on? Can we just stop talking about race? And as the episode kind of pointed out, and so much so as Beloved points out, and as everybody is pointing out right now, you can't move forward when you haven't even addressed what's there on the surface. And something that was really great about that episode was, unfortunately, this episode followed the passing of Congressman John Lewis, who was an incredible, incredible man. I had the pleasure of walking with him at multiple marches in Atlanta, just being inspired by him throughout my time in Atlanta as an activist. Once I first started getting into activism about 10 years ago, I used to read all the books about revolution and about the people who were involved in the civil rights movement, and John Lewis and SNCC always came up. So it was a pleasure to live in a city where I got to continue his work. But one of the quotes that he said was, "History when taught well shows us how to improve the world, but history when taught poorly falsely claims there is nothing to improve." That is America in a nutshell. And that is very much what Beloved portrays. It shows that if we don't look at our past and recognize the wounds that we've created, the damage that's been done, then we can't heal and move forward. It's impossible. It's implausible for that to happen. You you don't know how bad the wound is if you don't look at it and examine it. So to just ignore it and to pretend that it's okay, shit's gonna get infected. So that's what we're currently in as a country right now. We're currently infected, and I think that it's up to us to heal ourselves. It's up to us to make that decision personally, individually, and then as a collective consciousness that we want to move forward. We want to address the past. We want to make it right. We want to heal so that we can walk over this threshold into a new beginning together as a people. Everybody should read Toni Morrison. Everybody should read Beloved. I think it should be required reading in schools. I think we should all read more Black women. Just treat everyone with love and kindness, man. We're all in this thing together. Compassion is the way to win. My heart to your heart, my love to your love. Thank you for listening. And yeah, if you enjoyed Beloved or you disagree with what you think Beloved is, let's talk about it. Comment below, subscribe, do whatever you got to do. This channel, one day it'll get there. But yeah, thanks for listening.